So I was watching Deep Fat Fried the other day, and TJ, Paul, and Scotty were criticizing other people for not principally supporting free speech.
There's no freedom of speech advocates out there anymore, dude. Everybody is an advocate for their freedom of speech. All these people that are up in arms about Sargon getting banned off of Patreon.
Yeah.
Where were they when some of these other people got banned off of Patreon? Ghazi Kodzo or whatever the fuck. Oh, because he's an SJW and, you know, not what you want. His speech doesn't matter.
Right.
Let's not boycott Patreon for silencing his speech.
Now, if there's one thing we know about TJ and company, it's that they're willing to sacrifice for their principles.
If we're going to preserve freedom of speech, then we have to have the attitude about freedom of speech that even though I fucking hate your guts, even though I despise everything you have to say, I believe absolutely in your freedom of speech. And in fact, I am willing to die to protect it.
The funny thing is, they actually could have done something about the whole Sargon situation. They could have done what Dave Rubin, Sam Harris, and Jordan Peterson did, and deleted their Patreon accounts. I'm not a fan of Rubin or Peterson, and I'm sure that they'll be fine in the long run, but giving up hundreds of thousands of dollars for your principles is a profile in courage. The pessimist production boys, on the other hand, merely pay lip service to their ideals, while continuing to support a company that violates their standards of free speech. Now, am I a man of principle? Well, I certainly try to be, but I've never really been tested in any serious way, so it's impossible to know. It turns out that actually living your principles requires risk and sacrifice, and most people are not willing to forgo material security for abstract ideals. I don't necessarily fault people for that. I fault them for making heroic statements.
I believe absolutely in your freedom of speech, and in fact, I am willing to die to protect it.
Then falling woefully short. I also don't fault people for being tribal. I've talked about this before, and it's definitely one of my more controversial opinions. Perhaps I'll talk about it again in the future, but for now, I'll just leave it at this. At least most tribalists are not constantly applauding themselves for how principled they are. And this brings me to President Trump in the last weeks of 2018. At the very end of last year, the president did a few things that our friends on the left approve of.
And you want to hear shocking, I just counted. There are 6 stories in today's rundown where I agree with the Trump administration. 6. For all you MAGA guys out there, etc., we're not looking to pile on Donald Trump because it's personal. We're not looking to tear him down because he's in the other party. I don't care much about the parties. All I care about is policy. That's what we do here, right? We give you the facts, and we don't twist the facts. The facts are on Trump's side today. And so I wish it was every day. You know, he's the president of the United States. Unfortunately, he's a mess otherwise. But today, that's a lot of things that I agree with Donald Trump on, and I'm happy to give him those wins and that credit.
The progressives who sided with the president on these things claim that they're doing so out of principle.
This is a very encouraging thing. So I can't believe that so many left-wingers are just jumping on the pro-war bandwagon just because Trump doesn't want us involved in this war anymore. You know, I mean, like, what the fuck? It's just kind of separating the people who actually are on a political side because of principles from the people who are on a political side out of tribalism and a need to belong.
But I see things differently. This is an illustration in the fact that so many people really haven't thought their principles through, or are unwilling to see things to their logical conclusion. Let's look at Syria. I think it's safe to say that most people on the left are for our withdrawal of the troops. I have mixed feelings about the whole thing myself, but I tend to agree. That's not their only problem with the whole situation, though.
Number one, this is an illegal war. It's an offensive war against a country that didn't attack us, no congressional approval, no UN approval. So they didn't tell you that. They didn't tell you that. That seems like a pretty important fact when you're discussing, hey, we're pulling out of this war that we're in. Well, it was illegal in the first place. The scandal was really that we were there at all.
An illegal war. Leave aside the concept of international law for now. That's an interesting topic in its own rights, but I'm not going to talk about it here. What about under U.S. law? Is this war in line with the U.S. Constitution? Well, the statute used to authorize the military presence in Syria and elsewhere is justified under the 2001 Authorization of Use of Military Force Against Terrorists, which was passed by the Bush administration 3 days after 9/11. Many people on the left, particularly Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Lee, were prescient in their criticisms of it at the time, in that declaring an open-ended war against global terrorism could be used to justify military action virtually anywhere without further congressional authorization. This would, they argued, lead to the delegation of almost all war-making duties to the executive branch, as opposed to Congress, where it is constitutionally grounded. I'm sorry to say, but their predictions came true. Because terrorism is such a nebulous term, by declaring war on it, you can justify use of military force nearly anywhere against just about anyone. You just label them a terrorist, and there is your authorization. No need to make the case to the people's representatives or to the electorate itself. Even by the extraordinarily expansive standards laid out in the 2001 statute, presidents have exceeded their authorities, including President Trump. On April 7, 2017, the U.S. military launched 59 Tomahawk missiles at an airbase under the control of Syria's dictator, Bashar al-Assad. Assad is an awful man, no doubt. And there are people who know foreign policy far better than I do who believe that we should take military action against him. That's an interesting debate, but it's not one I'm here to talk about. My point is, if we choose to take military action, Congress needs to pass a law, just as the Constitution says so. The 2001 law gave the government permission to fight terrorist organizations, not governments. On the point of process, I fully agree with the left-wing critics of the war.
It was illegal in the first place. The scandal was really that we were there at all.
So, I'm glad to see progressives invoking the Constitution to restrict government power. The only problem is, they don't actually believe that. Like so many others, they don't principally believe in the Constitution. So many of the same people who I saw calling the Syrian war illegal applauded when Trump issued an executive order banning bump stocks.
So I actually have some pretty good news for everybody here. Donald Trump is pushing a ban on bump stocks. And those, of course, are the devices that turn weapons into machine guns. So it'll take a weapon and make it fully automatic.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, I love the whole phrasing there. I mean, that you know, because automatic weapons are those are illegal, right? Yeah. Again, we already have gun control. We have it. It's just deciding which guns we're going to control. And so...
And how we're going to control them.
Right. And so you can't have automatic weapons, but you can have something that mimics automatic. Yeah. Well, then that's an automatic weapon. If it mimics it, and it mimics it effectively, well, then it's it.
Why didn't you just, instead of doing an executive memo, as they're calling it, couldn't you have done an executive order, which said, I'm banning bump stocks? Now, there might be, I'm not sure, there might be constitutional issues with that, where they go, well, the president can't do that unilaterally, but to which I would respond, okay, take me to court. And then have somebody take you to court, and you stand your position of, I want to ban bump stocks, fully automatic weapons are already banned. This makes a weapon fully automatic. It's a matter of simple logic to ban it, or else there's a giant loophole, and that goes against what the spirit of the law is supposed to be. If we're banning fully automatic weapons, you ban fully automatic weapons across the board. You don't leave giant fucking loopholes.
Now, how did Trump go about doing that? Under a 1934 law, the ATF was given wide latitude to regulate automatic weapons. Trump simply expanded their authority to include devices that help semi-automatic weapons mimic machine gun fire, like bump stocks. Robert Verbruggen lays out the problem with this in National Review. To reiterate the problem once again, the current status defines a machine gun, i.e. heavily regulated automatic weapon, as a weapon which shoots, is designed to shoot, or can be readily restored to shoot automatically more than one shot, without manual reloading, by a single function of the trigger. This simply does not describe bump stocks, which don't affect the relationship between the trigger's functioning and the number of shots fired at all. Every time the trigger functions, one bullet comes out. Bump stocks work by helping the user pull the trigger incredibly quickly. As the ATF itself once put it, the shooter must apply constant forward pressure with the non-shooting hand, and constant rearward pressure with the shooting hand. And this pressure, along with the gun's recoil, is channeled into repeated pulls of the trigger as the weapon bounces back and forth against the user's trigger finger. This has the effect of making normal semi-automatic gunfire rapidly like a machine gun, but it's not a machine gun as the law defines it. Even the Obama administration thus had to approve these devices for sale. So, the Trump administration outlawed bump stocks simply by expanding the definition in a completely unfounded way, so that they are covered under something that is already regulated. In other words, Trump pulled the same trick the military has been pulling for 20 years with the word terrorism. No need to pass a new law when you can just reinterpret or redefine an old one. Now, I appreciate that the future of the Syrian civil war is a lot more important than the future of bump stocks in America. I'm not suggesting that the two things are identical in consequence here. I'm making a point about process. The Constitution is a document that lays out the authority of the federal government. It determines what each branch can and can't do. If you're going to callously disregard it when the government does something you like, you can't invoke it when the government does something you don't like. Either all of it matters or none of it does. If we're not going to hold the government within the confines of the Constitution, what's the point of even having one? It's not a perfect document by any means, and if you don't like it, you can change it. There's a process for that too, but it's not easy, deliberately so. It turns out being consistent on matters of legality is hard, but unless somebody is consistent, I don't want to hear shit about their principles.